community outreach. There were 4 key objectives in preparing the housing needs assessment, and that was to engage the Norwalk community and housing stakeholders in a robust dialogue about current and future housing needs. We did that through a series of workshops, which included some online workshops, in-person workshops, as well as several pop-up events. We compiled demographic, housing, and market data to identify the factors, trends, and shifts that are impacting housing needs. We identified disparities and the unique needs of different subpopulations, including certain lower income households, racial groups, or age groups. And the purpose of this document is to serve as a tool to guide housing policy and program design, which is the major component of the next phase in the Norwalk Affordable Housing Action Plan. And just to answer the one question from the public about the survey, that survey was led by the Economic Development Office. There was a concern about launching 2 surveys that were similar in nature at the same time. So we did have a few questions within that survey that was geared towards this, but that was just one component in a much broader community engagement effort. So in the housing needs assessment, we identified 8 key findings, and I'm going to walk through each of those findings and then some of the backup data to support those findings. The first being that the city has a critical need to provide more affordable housing, social services, and economic pathways for its very low-income households. So even though Norwalk has a relatively high median income of $98,000 a year, a quarter of the population earns less than $50,000 a year. While there are, as you can see in this chart here, the proportion of renters that are in the lower income bracket is higher than the proportion of homeowners. We did look at both. We did find, and I'll get into this a little bit more later, that there are housing cost burdened members of the population at all income levels, and regardless of rental or housing or homeownership status. So number 2, there are some, so I was just saying, there are some renters and homeowners at all income levels that are financially burdened by the high cost of housing in Norwalk. Being house burdened is based on the threshold of 30% of your household income going towards housing costs. That is a threshold that's set at the federal level. So roughly 40% of all of Norwalk's households pay more than 30% of their household income towards housing costs. This chart here includes renters and homeowners, but you can see here that this is the line item here, so roughly 40%. And then if you look down here, the summary of all of the residents of Norwalk that are making below 83% of the state median income or below $75,000 a year, roughly 85% of that portion of the population is house burdened. Three, the city needs to significantly expand the supply of rental housing that is affordable to households earning incomes less than $75,000 a year, or 83% of Connecticut's median income. So that's that 85% that I covered on the last slide. Almost half of Norwalk's renters pay more than 30% of their household income towards their housing costs. But the cost burden rates are especially high for these households that are making less than $75,000 a year. The city needs more options for affordable home ownership. This is something we heard a lot during the community engagement process, that there just weren't enough starter home opportunities. There aren't enough smaller homes or townhomes or condos. That type of housing has not been developed in the last 10 years. While we've seen quite a bit of growth in the luxury rental building, which is contributing to this upward trend of rental units here, we did not see that same growth in home ownership opportunities. And so what's happened between 2012 and 2022 is the home ownership rate fell from about 65% of households to 55% of households. Also during that relatively same time, the median sales price for a single family home in Norwalk rose 41% from about $413,000 in 2015 to about $700,000 in 2023, while the inventory dropped about 81%. And some of that is impacted by the trends we're seeing nationally, especially in this area with COVID and more people moving out of the city. That has possibly exacerbated a trend that was going to occur anyway. Norwalk needs more housing for retail workers, public safety personnel, teachers, and hospital workers. Approximately 75% of the workers within Norwalk do not live within the city. These workers contribute not only to the local economy, but they're also essential, critical workers to the provision of public services. Now, granted, there are a healthy number of commuters to the city of Norwalk that live in surrounding towns and by choice. But we also looked into some replica data, which takes cell phone data and sees where people are traveling from. And we noticed that there was a pretty large pocket of what we appear to be renters that are commuting from Bridgeport to jobs in Norwalk. And there appears to be a pretty big pocket of homeowners commuting from the Shelton area to Norwalk for jobs. And it's likely that some of these commuters would much prefer to live within Norwalk if the homeownership or the rental opportunities were available to them. Those are pretty long commutes. The lack of affordable housing makes it harder for Norwalk's employers to secure labor to grow their businesses. And as we can see in this slide, there was a drop between 2011 and 2021 in the number of jobs within the city. That is on the uptick, but that's something that additional housing opportunities can help continue. New rental housing provides local housing, quality of life, and economic development benefits. So as you all are aware, there's been a sizable segment of new rental developments within the city. And there's a good number of Norwalk residents that can afford those apartments that are priced at the state median income or higher. The production of these new rental units has helped to revitalize key parts of the city, such as South Norwalk and the Route 7 area. And these have value in terms of their provision of affordable housing as well. And many of them have included at least some affordable units. What we did here in the community outreach process was that these affordable units were not always affordable to the people who needed them, or they were not sized to the needs of the population. So there aren't a lot of family-sized units, for example. Another thing we heard is that sometimes the fees within these units were too high, so that even though the rent maybe was affordable, once you added in all the fees, it became problematic. So those are all items that we're looking at in the policy action plan. All kinds of rental housing are needed, but there's an especially acute need for more affordable 2-bedroom and family-size rental apartments. The affordable and 2-bedroom apartments are especially in high demand by young couples, starter families, and seniors who now represent nearly a fifth of the city's population. And lastly, the city needs to continue linking housing to transit, walkable neighborhoods, and economic development strategies. The current levels of transit utilization are under 2% for work trips to Norwalk job sites, so the city can do more to be transit accessible. Both residents and stakeholders broadly expressed concern about worsening traffic conditions and supported major expansions of transit service and the location of housing near transit. Obviously, the closer you are to transit, the less you need to rely on an automobile, and that can help decrease the traffic on the city's roads. So out of that housing needs assessment and all of the community outreach and the data, we developed a community values statement. This was first reviewed just this week by the committee. This is the revised version. We're still tweaking it, but this is where we are right now. Norwalk strives to be a city with housing accessible to all, a place where residents can live and work because of the affordable, diverse housing stock that accommodates the diversity of its population. So that's going to be the guiding principle of the policy document. We've also developed some potential public policy responses to housing needs. These include local, and we assign them all themes. So the first theme being local zoning and regulatory changes. These include expansion of the workforce housing requirements. So we do know that the city just undertook a very extensive zoning code update. So we have gone through that. And what we've tried to do, we went over this with the committee on Tuesday, is identify some of the areas that could have some additional tweaking. We can see how the code works over the next few years. And if it's not meeting the needs, then we've identified some places where it can be adjusted. So one of those items is increasing density bonuses for the provision of affordable housing units, especially further incentivizing family-size affordable housing and workforce housing units. So maybe a larger bonus for those types of units that are in most demand. Allowing alternative housing types, such as single-room occupancy buildings. That is something we heard in our community outreach, is that there is one of those buildings right now in Norwalk that is fulfilling a very specific need, especially for the very low income population. And if there could be another building like that, it would be helpful to that portion of the population. Increasing permitted density to facilitate increased supply of all housing types. Fundamentally, this is a supply and demand problem. So if by increasing the supply of housing at all levels, it could potentially either slow down the inflation of the cost of housing or could reduce certain types of housing costs. Further incentivizing transit-oriented development, reduction of parking requirements. A major cost of multifamily development is the cost of structured parking. So where we can reduce parking requirements, that could help make that type of development more affordable, but also looking at minimizing restrictions on accessory dwelling units. As the public speaker was mentioning, that is one of the low-hanging fruits of getting more availability of housing. So not only is it a good way for seniors to age in place, it's also a way for new homeowners to get into the housing market. If they are able to have a rental property on their property, that can help offset the cost of the mortgage and make a house that wasn't otherwise affordable to them affordable. So that section of the code was recently updated, but we think that there's a couple more areas that could be tweaked, such as eliminating the parking requirement for ADUs as one example. And lastly, streamlining the development review and approval process for affordable developments. Another policy response is public-private partnerships. One example of this would be the use of underutilized city-owned land for affordable housing, including family-size and deeply affordable units. The way this could be facilitated is through a competitive developer RFP process that specifies criteria to meet identified housing and community goals. And ultimately, the development could include a mix of public land, public funds, such as grants, and private capital. There's also tax and financing innovations. These can be used to facilitate affordable housing development and preservation and the rehabilitation of existing affordable housing. Not all affordable housing is provided in large developments. Sometimes they're the smaller buildings that have been converted from a single family home to a multi-family building. One of the tools that could be used is microgrants to help facilitate capital improvements on these developments. And as in exchange for those microgrants, that housing could be made deed restricted affordable in perpetuity or for a set period of time. Community land trusts. These are used to facilitate affordable home ownership units with income restrictions and resale limitations. So the community land trust will hold the underlying property, and that's what they can use to help keep that property affordable. And lastly, tax abatements to incentivize affordable housing development. That is a tool that's allowed by the state, but it would have to be implemented at the local level. Administration and implementation. The Affordable Housing Action Plan will identify some key policy strategies, implementation measures, and responsibility for the action item and anticipated timeline. This is all going to be in a large matrix We presented the draft matrix to the committee on Tuesday. It's still being revised. And we also are recommending implementing a tracking system for annual housing starts and demolitions so that we can track annual shifts in housing supply and see how we're doing in terms of creating more affordable units. Federal and state advocacy is another theme. Tax and financing policies at the state and federal level can be a barrier to certain types of affordable and missing middle housing, in particular the homeownership type units. One thing that the city could do is lobby its state and federal delegation to make policy changes to overcome the institutional financing and tax code barriers to multifamily homeownership buildings, including condominiums and limited equity co-ops. In the matrix that we presented earlier this week, there's a number of policy guidelines or a number of programs and policies that we've identified. Just two of them are highlighted here. And one of the other things that I'd want to point out is that the state does have a very large number, not a very large number, it has a good number of programs available to both existing affordable buildings and potential new affordable buildings. And one of the things that we are recommending is more of an education component to making sure that some of these smaller developers, smaller property owners within the city are aware of those programs. And then also making sure that we're lobbying the delegations to make sure that those programs remain funded and that they include the types of units that you want to see in Norwalk. And lastly, advocating for more governmental funding for public and affordable housing. So the next steps in this process is to refine the action and implementation plan. That's the matrix that I was describing. Then we will go through and assess the impacts and benefits of these actions. Next would be finalizing the Affordable Action Plan. And that is the full document that explains everything, that has all these, that puts all the pieces together. And then lastly, it's preparing a guidebook to affordable housing in Norwalk. And that would be more of a user-friendly, smaller guidebook that would be available to the public and the policymakers within the city. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Ashley, thank you so much. That was such a wonderful presentation, and there's an enormous amount to work from there. I want to open it up to any council members who have any questions for Ashley or comments. Chairman Seed.
Hi, so I had a question just about with the affordable housing and the need for it, especially with when it comes to the apartments. But what can be done? Because a lot of times we keep building these apartments and they have like workforce or affordable options, but then you still have. I think we have another issue with so much people coming from the city, where people from Norwalk kind of still get priced out with these efforts because they don't really have access to them. So this model that it goes with, even with the affordable or workforce, still not affordable for the people in Norwalk. So has that been thought about? Just because we do have the problem with not Norwalk residents, but people from the city trying to move up to Norwalk or Connecticut.
Yes, so this is a very complex regional problem. This part of Fairfield County does get pressure from people trying to move out of the city. One of the tools that I was speaking of was the micro grant option as a way to try to preserve some of Norwalk's naturally occurring affordable housing. So some of these older buildings, a way to get them updated, keep the people that are living in them in place, but maybe improve those situations. We're also, one of the action items is WestCog recently developed its own affordable housing action plan and had a number of action items in there that addresses this at more of a regional level. So recommending that Norwalk support WestCog in those efforts to try to tackle this from multiple fronts.
Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
No,
No. Mr. Freyer had his hand up. I was looking down. I didn't see that. Go ahead.
I appreciate the idea of the micro grants, but I'm just curious about funding of affordable housing, particularly in the context of what Mr. Seed had mentioned, is that you've got maybe, there's no paucity of people coming from out of town to that can afford these apartments, but some of the people that are not only younger people but older people, to their income is not not that strong that they can afford new housing that's coming in. Is there any thought to, and I'm thinking about some of the, one of the areas that we talked about was hospital workers, of partnering with the hospital to build affordable housing for hospital workers. Same could be said for maybe some of the other industries that are prevalent in the city.
I think that's a great idea, and that's something that we could include under the umbrella of the public-private partnerships.
How does that work?
So there's a couple different ways. So if the hospital, for example, had the piece of land, if the city has a housing trust fund, if you've ever taken fee in lieu instead of the provision of affordable housing units, the city could contribute those funds to help support the development of that housing. Another option is the tax abatements to help reduce the costs of the provision of that housing. Those are the two main options. And then the last being the concept that I talked about, the developer RFP, if you wanted to donate city land to it.
So would then the availability of that housing be only, let's pick the hospital, for example, would only be to hospital workers?
It could potentially be that way if it was a project that was sponsored by the hospital for their own employees. Depending on how the deal ends up getting structured, that could bring some complications in terms of the exclusiveness of that. But there are ways that could be made so it was exclusive to the hospital. There are some of the high-end private schools in the region, for example, like they have workforce housing on their properties.
Is the hospital tax exempt though, if they were owning those properties?
I believe the hospital's tax exempt already, if it's a not-for-profit.
Most hospitals are not for profit, but they run a profit.
It wouldn't work because they're already tax exempt, right?
Oh, the tax abatement part. Yes, sorry, good point.
Council President Young.
Oh, thank you. So thank you for this. I just have to say it's something that I think we've heard before, and I think one of the questions that come to mind with all of the development that's going on, how much land does the city even have to really talk about being able to build? Like what does that even look like? And maybe Steve, you can speak to that. To providing affordable housing that wouldn't include, I don't want to say developers who are looking for money, but people that are going to be willing to do the work, to do these types of projects. I mean, what does the land that we own, what does that look like? I mean, I think if we look at the space, the Norden place, that's a big piece of property, but I know that that's not city owned. I'm just curious about that, because we've talked about affordable housing for a very long time, but while we're talking about it, buildings are being constructed and people are still being pushed out. And now we're talking about it at the height of this this movement, not just here, just across the country. And so prices are high, prices are very high. And so what does this really look like? I mean, moving forward in the next 5 years or so, do we look like we were able to build more housing? I know that was a lot. It's just a very
So we are doing a GIS-based mapping analysis of underutilized properties within the city as part of this. So in addition to some of these city-owned properties, which I understand there aren't very many, we can also look at some of your institutional properties. So there have been some success stories throughout the country of religious institutions, for example, if they had excess land, being able to convert that to affordable housing as a public-private partnership. So those are some of the other tools that we would look at.
Thank you.
Steve?
Thanks. So I think what you're hearing is that, when we talked about this at the beginning, this is a very complex issue. It's not going to be solved. It's not going to be solved through zoning alone. So I just want to preface it with that. The workforce housing program that's been in place, and it is a pretty successful program by the measures that it was set up to accomplish, is only meant to handle one segment of the population. It was really meant to handle, it's called workforce housing for a reason. It's meant to, it was originally set up for teachers, firefighters, and so forth. So the Norwalk's, backbone workforce didn't have to live an hour away to get to their job. But that's really only targeting one segment of the population. Then you have the work being done by the housing authority, which is, really dealing with a much different area of the population spectrum for affordable housing. And then kind of the area in the middle is one of the areas that we really need to focus on. Just to address a couple of points that were brought up related to the hospital itself, we did, as part of the rezoning, change the zoning around the hospital pretty significantly to allow more two families where it was only single families, and then small multifamilies where there was like a two-family zone before. So we tried to incentivize soft development in those areas with the understanding of that's, the hospitals, if it's not the largest employers, it's one of the largest employers. So we wanted to be able to have their workforce in as close proximity to that facility as possible to cut down on expense for them, as well as cut down on travel costs and then impacts on the road. So we are looking at that very carefully, as well as some of the other things that the zoning recommendations held in terms of the percent of affordability, which kind of Ashley talked about. We did a pretty good economic dive into that a few years ago when we rezoned West Ave and Wall Street. So we kind of know, at least based on the data at the time, what's going to work from the private development side and what's not going to work. So there's lots of different approaches. I think the one I'm most excited about, that I really kind of what I hit at the beginning, is I want the recommendations in this plans to be as thought out and as specific as we can get them at the plan stage. But the idea of increasing ownership opportunities, especially, because we hear a lot from the developers that the laws and the way that the state regulations are, is that building condominiums is just not profitable for them. It's very difficult and costly. So that's why, one of the reasons why apartments are built is the legislation that's in place. So we're hoping that with the help of Ashley and their team, that we can start crafting language that we can then work with our state delegation on to loosen up those laws and then incentivize more home ownership. And that, I think, I've had that conversation with Ms. Young many times over the years on how do we increase that. So I think if, that by itself would be a big step in the right direction. And then just looking at some of the programs we have now and how do we fine tune those and how do we optimize those? And then what are the areas that we're missing that we can address as a city? Because as I mentioned, it's not going to be just a zoning fix on all these things.
I really appreciate that, Steve. Councilmember Smith, why don't you go before me? As chair, I would try and save my remarks for last.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Goldstein. Thank you so much for this. This this study and this action plan pulls together all of these difficulties. And, my question is, partially already been answered, which is how do we stay on top of these state and federal regulations that, Steve, you just mentioned? It's like, we know we need more condominiums, and it has been so frustrating. It's just apartments, apartments, apartments. So whatever our commitment here in the city has been to provide more housing and a more affordable housing, we have been hamstrung by state and federal regulations. So I think that that's one of the most important things that I'm learning here from this is that now we can develop that plan and we can work with our state and federal delegations to make those changes. And then the other thing that I want to ask this question, and Ashley, anybody can respond. Steve, Michelle, how do we change the narrative that tax abatements are bad? There seems to be a narrative that, we're giving, this away to, the big developers and everything. And, they are so important, and I'm thinking about, the Wall Street place that is really just finally getting underway, that is going to provide a lot of, market, what was it, like 30 through 80% market median income housing. And so you have two factors, right? You have the tax credits that the developer receives, because of course they want to make a profit, right? So they're getting tax credits, but then they are also getting these tax abatements, the taxes that they'll have to pay to the city are stepped in. And I think that, I've never understood the pushback on I'm talking about two separate things, right? Tax credits and tax abatements, but I've never understood the negativity around tax abatements. So how do we address that? And how do we change the narrative that it's ultimately good for our community?
I guess I'll take the first step. So, changing the narrative is one of the harder things of tackling affordable housing in general. And yes, I think it needs to be framed as fulfilling a community need, and you're fulfilling the needs of your current residents. These are your friends, these are your neighbors, these are your family members. This is providing an opportunity for them to stay within Norwalk and age in place or start their family. And sometimes these tax abatements are really what is needed to fill that gap between what the market can naturally provide and what is needed by the community. The market alone can't fix this problem.
I think, Ms. Lay, I thought it was a good point with the affordable, like making it kind of just a Norwalk problem, where affordable housing isn't like a certain type of people, it's everyday people. And even when you speak about affordable housing, there's levels. Even the 85% of the median income isn't like affordable. Even to them, they're having an issue renting or buying a home because they're spending more than 40% of their income on housing. Even when they want to go to buy, they're being outbid and people are paying with cash and they're having a hard time buying a home in Norwalk. So this is an issue that there's not a demographic, there's an age. This is a problem for everyone, from people fresh out of high school and college to seniors who worked there their whole life and are trying to retire. So I think having that message that, hey, this is your issue. And even me and Josh were out knocking on doors last year, and people were talking about the zoning and it was like, hey, I don't want apartments. And once we said, hey, like, what about your son? Like, I want my son to be able to live here when he finished college. I want your grandson to be able to live here. And it's like, oh, I didn't think about it like that. And once you change that narrative of what affordable housing is and who it's for everybody. And it's so that Norwalkers and people who want to live in Norwalk could afford to live here. And I think that's a huge thing that would fix kind of that narrative on the tax breaks and even affordable housing on a bigger scale.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, and I think the other point we didn't really talk about, which is a pretty significant one, is that it's not just a Norwalk problem, it's a state problem, it's a national problem. We just happen to live in one of the most expensive areas of the country, and we don't have any land available. You know, we to Ms. Young's point, where is this land? It's the same issue we come up with almost every controversial planning and zoning application now, is that we're dealing with legacy properties that, you know, where everything's changed around it and now something else is going on there, and it's causing a lot of angst. So I don't think there's not going to be a silver bullet that comes out of this. I think, and we're not going to solve all of Norwalk's affordability problems. I wish it would, but I think it's going to address as much of it as is realistic as we can. And as many steps that we can take and as many problems we can solve, we'll do. But it goes beyond Norwalk. It's, you know, our neighboring towns need to do more. That's a known fact that's been talked about for a long time. But not building more housing is not going to solve it. That much I'm aware of. It's you're not going to decrease affordability by not building housing. It just, the math doesn't work that way. Supply and demand.
Can I just ask one more question before we move on? Which is, are we keeping an eye on the Airbnb market? You know, because this is becoming I brought this up in another meeting some months ago, but it is becoming it's not just becoming, it is a problem in many parts of the country where, you know, big companies are buying up, you know, the small homes. First time home buyers don't have enough stock, right, to purchase from. So are we keeping an eye on that? Are we in touch with the real estate market? You know, I don't know if we're seeing any of that here in Norwalk, but I just think it's something we need to, it needs to be on our radar at least.
Yeah, we did talk about that quite a bit during the zoning process, that was one of the planning and zoning commissioners, I think it was Nick Cantor, had brought up that could be something that's, it's happening nationally. We haven't seen that specifically here. We do get complaints and concerns about Airbnbs on a very local neighbor to neighbor level at times, but we haven't seen it become like a prolific issue.
Okay.
I just see that a number of people, I know time is rather limited here. I'm going to skip around because I know some people have their hands up who've already spoken. Councilmember Burnett, I don't think you've spoken yet, so.
Thank you, Chairman Goldstein, and I'll make my question fairly brief, and I'll direct it to Ashley and Steve. As you were going through the data, was there anything that, and let me preface by saying, you indicated that affordable housing is not just a Norwalk problem. It's countywide, it's countrywide. But my question is, was there anything in the data research that stood out to you that was unique to Norwalk that you did not see in other communities that you might have worked with?
That's a good question. I would say that the trends that we saw in Norwalk were comparable to the trends that we're seeing in places like White Plains, Stamford, New Rochelle, those areas. Similar, you know, your sister cities in the region. I can't think offhand of anything that was particularly unique that jumped out.
I'll give a complete cop-out answer, and I have to go back and look at my notes because we went through a couple drafts on the housing needs assessment, and we had a lot of back and forth on what the data actually meant, and then taking the data to the next level, because there was times I'm like, this is really interesting, but what does it actually mean? So we went back and looked again. So I'll take a look at my notes, and I'll happy to email it out.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna sort of arbitrarily pick an order here based on who hasn't spoken. I think Councilmember Dunn, I think you may have asked one question, but you're next, then the Councilmember Edie, Young, and Freyer, and then I want to say something as well.
So I guess this is for my questions for Ashley, and I do have a comment. I'm interested in what family size entailed, and I have a comment about that too, is that we have a lot of housing in Norwalk that does not that may be affordable or not quite affordable, but does not really offer great quality of life. You know, like 3 families living in a 2-bedroom. And I know, you know, being a young person when I was 20 and 5 single adults living in an apartment, we all did that when we were starting out. A lot of us did. Which is very different than maybe someone, you know, somebody who's disabled in a wheelchair. When we're looking at the lack of housing or where we need housing, do we overlay that with maybe veterans or, you know, seniors that have mobility issues? Can we dive a little deeper into what kind of housing we need? Because I'm sure there's, as you said, there's a need for family-sized housing. What does that mean with 5 kids? You know, is that the housing we're missing?
Right. So it was the overcrowding issue that you brought up. So the 2-bedroom units and up, so 2-bedroom, 3 bedrooms, there aren't a lot of 4 bedrooms, aren't a lot of 3 bedrooms, frankly. There's not enough of that type of housing available so that people are ending up being more crowded into 2-bedroom units. That is something that came out in the data. We did have some community outreach to seniors groups specifically. So we do have some recommendations in the housing needs assessment for that demographic. Certainly any
Weaker than another, or
was that? I'm sorry.
Area that we're weaker than another? Do we have a sense of like we really need some 5 bedrooms, you know, or do we?
I didn't hear 5 bedrooms. And I don't know if this was an issue that we came across and it came up at our committee meeting earlier this week. There aren't a lot of those types of units available. So when the realtors say, well, I don't rent that many units, well, it's because there weren't any units to rent of that size. But we know anecdotally from these community outreach events that there is a desire and a need for these larger units because there are overcrowding situations.
Well, that's a subjective term, overcrowding. It's like what are people's expectations for crowding? You know, you could put two of your kids in a bedroom, but you can't have 2. Not that you can't, but
there is some guidance from HUD on what is objectively overcrowding in terms of the size of the bedrooms and the number of people, or the size of the unit and the number of people living in the unit.
So when you're talking about, I'm sorry to, but when you're talking about households being, you know, of the median, do we have a sense of what the average number of adults versus underage people are in a household in Norwalk? And
we do have some of that data from the American Community Survey that's in the housing needs assessment. I can drill down on that more to your specific question.
I think I guess that's my only comment.
Okay.
I think we need to know what we actually need. We know that we need housing and low-income housing and more affordable housing, but what are those specific needs in terms of our population would be.
Right. So, I mean, family sizes have generally shrunk in the last 20 years. Just on average, that's what comes out in the census, but we can provide that information on what is the average family size in Norwalk based on and by income.
And how many of those families
and how many of them are house burdened
are multiple adults? I'm seeing a lot more, you know, over 18 people living together in a single house.
That also is captured in the American Community Survey, so we can get that number.
I'm done.
Councilmember Edie.
Thanks, Josh. I just had a few, they're questions, but you don't have to really answer them now. Just maybe we could talk about this. The other day in the meeting, we did talk about raising the percentage for workforce housing from 10%. I would really like to know how high that number could go, because I'm looking at around 25%. So I just want to know what the limit, or is there a cap on that? Also, how do we increase the income limit for the workforce housing? because right now it's at around 68,000. And if you're making that's decent income, but if you're making that, you still can't afford the apartments here. So as you've heard, you're going to get a little raise, or I'm going to just put my story out there. I almost negotiated this new job down for the income because I didn't want to lose the affordability. And to me, that is just, that's just unacceptable. Yeah. Because either way, it's still, even at your 75 mark, you're still not able to afford. You need to be making at least $40, $42 an hour to be able to afford an apartment in Mark. And so though you're saying workforce, you're still not, you're still not near there. So that's something we need to think about. And also on the list, I know I asked this question also the other day about the prioritization of people getting on the workforce list, because I was concerned about people who don't live in the area or don't work in the area getting on the list. Is there a way that we are monitoring that? Just curious about that, but we don't have to answer it today, but I'm just throwing that out there. So thank you.
I'll take a stab at your first two questions, and I would defer the list question to the city staff. In terms of what percent, there is going to be an upper threshold, because at some point you're going to hit a point where it's the bonuses associated with any workforce housing or where the math isn't going to work for the developer. So numbers that I've seen in some of the sister communities go up to 20%. I haven't seen anything above 20%. In the ranges that just came out in the WestCog study, they were recommending, I think, up to 18%. So it's somewhere, and I think what we had in the matrix was in the draft matrix was 10 to 15%. So that's one of those items that we need to do some more due diligence on to figure out what that number is for Norwalk specifically. And that's something that is a number that will have to be revisited as the market changes and as interest rates change and housing construction costs change. It's one of those numbers that you want to stay on top of, so that you are getting the percentages that make sense, and you're not discouraging the construction of more housing. In terms of increasing the income limit for workforce housing, that was one of our recommendations. There was a question that came up at the committee about whether or not that would somehow run afoul of 830G. So that's something we're researching, and we do have a workaround if that is a barrier. So that's something that we'll be coming back to the committee with.
I think Council President Young, then Councilmember Freyer, then me.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you, Ms. Edie, for your comments, because I understand, one of the things that we have an issue with as well is rent. I don't want to say control or stabilization. So we have an issue with that. Was that looked at? Because what we're seeing just with the development going on are landlords now raising their rent upwards of $500. It could be anywhere from $200 to $500 on families, and that certainly is an extremely high increase. So and I don't know if there's any control that we have as a city over those sorts of things. And because I'm in with fair rent, we hear people coming in all the time dealing with that issue. And so this is definitely something that we have to take to our state delegation on how do we keep that sort of thing from happening, because that definitely is pushing people out. And are the affordable units in these developments remaining affordable in perpetuity, or is there a time when that affordability is no longer necessary?
I believe and probably Steve can speak to this better, but I believe that the most recent developments are all in perpetuity, but there may have been some years ago that did have an expiration.
And,
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Steve.
No, yeah, Ashley's correct. They are in perpetuity. So I think that's been the way the workforce housing regs have been set up.
Currently, or has that been?
No, I should say, since it was set up, that's my understanding. There were some units that I think have sunset, but all the ones that we have now are all in perpetuity.
Do we know which ones have sunset? Are
We could get that for you. I don't, Michelle might have that in a sheet that we have to send up to the state, so we could probably track that down pretty easily.
Yeah, those might
and just go ahead.
those just might be the units not under the workforce housing program that have time limits. So all the workforce housing units that our department tracks are in perpetuity, but on the master list throughout the city, for like the Norwalk Redevelopment Agency has some units, and the Norwalk Housing Authority has a bunch of units that might sunset at some point. So we can provide that.
And just one last thing. And so some of these affordable units, and as Ms. Edie kind of alluded to, you might go in under your income, but you work overtime and you go over income, and now you've lost your eligibility. Is that something you all have heard or people speak about at all?
That has popped up before. Michelle has dealt with that because she administers the workforce program for us. So that has come up. And I think that's kind of what Ashley was talking about. I think that might be something we could look at. I can tell you from our past experience with trying to go from 10% to 20%, we had a developer revolt at that point, them saying, I know the response is going to be, well, that's what they're going to say, but they were pretty adamant that that was a significant game changer for them. But maybe there's a way we can look at structuring it similar to what we have now, but then have either through bonuses or other things where you can have a second tier where it's either, you could have a second or a third tier where there's a second tier above that 80% SMI. You could have a tier below that 60% SMI. So that's something else we'll examine in terms of bonuses and structure. And then we're really trying to come up with a formula where we achieve some of these goals, but we also don't curtail development totally.
Thank you.
Councilmember Freyer.
Yeah, I just wanted to just reiterate my comments before, is that I think this is an area where we have to get more details on and get more specific as to how do we deal with some of these problems that Ms. Edie brought up. And because honestly, if I'm a developer, I'm not going to try to do any affordable housing if I'm not going to be able to get my money out of it. And on the other side of it is the individuals that Chairman Seed had mentioned, is that, we've got an awful lot of Norwalk residents, either older, younger, whatever, that just can't afford some of these prices, even if you're going to do it at 20% of whatever market is. So my only comment is just, let's get more details on how we can focus on making this housing affordable to our older and younger citizens of Norwalk. Thanks.
I couldn't agree with that more. I just to sort of, I think everyone's given a lot of really great feedback. And I think that while I agree that a lot of the overall conclusions are things that we've heard before, I think a lot of the very detailed figures and specifics that are in here really help make the case. And I think for two things specifically, especially as we work with our state and federal delegation, I think that what Councilmember Edie was talking about workforce housing is so important, because I think part of the problem, and Steve, tell me if I'm wrong about this, but if I remember correctly, workforce housing is the the median income, the way that's calculated is on a regional basis. It's not based on the city, if I'm not mistaken.
It's the state median income.
It's a state median income, which
Yes.
is
Some programs use an area median income, which is our area is, Fairfield County is going to be significantly higher than the state.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of the problem is the way workforce how I mean, this is a personal opinion, but I think part of the problem is the way workforce housing is calculated results in disparate outcomes depending on where you are. And I think that one of the crucial problems we have, and I found in the report, it was so striking where it said that 75% of the people who work in our public sector, our teachers, firefighters, police, don't live here. And we know this, like we know a lot of the people who work in our public sector are a lot of them grew up in Norwalk and just can't afford to live here now, so they commute from the Valley, Shelton or Monroe, and other towns down to Norwalk. So I do think that one of the things, and I don't know, Ashley, this is something that the committee's talked about, but is figuring out a way to sort of suggest to the state to take another look at how workforce income is actually calculated. And if we need to actually be more specific based on the region, because the regions in the state, even though this is a small state, the regions are very different. I also want to touch a little bit on ADUs. I remember a couple of years ago, planning and zoning had made a decision to add a site plan review requirement to ADU applications. And I remember one of the questions was going to be whether that could slow down the proliferation of ADUs, which is frankly designed as, Councilmember Freyer was kind of talking about really sort of people who are either are older and have fixed incomes, younger who are just getting started. I don't really know to date sort of whether the ADU construction has really increased in the last couple of years, or frankly, if it's sort of been what it has been, which is pretty stagnant over a sort of a period of basically 30 years.
So just to clarify, that the ADU requirement for the site plan is only for the detached units. It's not.
Yes, that's correct. Not for the in-law suites, but yes.
Yeah, we have seen some. I mean, it's a little early to draw any conclusions since the regulation was changed. It's probably not even been 18 months yet. But I think there are several members of the commission that are very keen on loosening up those regulations even further, in terms of the parking requirement, in terms of the site plan and a couple other things. My personal opinion is I don't think that that's the hurdle that's preventing a lot of these ADUs from developing. I haven't seen any data anywhere that says that ADUs are like the end all be all for solving some of these housing crises. I think it's just
not at all. I think it's a
tool in
tool.
the toolbox.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I don't think you could construct enough ADUs to come even close to matching a lot of the figures in this report, which shows that we need to be building a lot more housing, but we just need to be building the right kind of housing. And that's the sort of cognitive dissonance that we haven't quite figured out yet. But I think, Ashley, I think you and your team, this, even though I know this is a draft, this is excellent. And we really appreciate the work that you've done. And frankly, I'm glad that the public can have a chance to review this. And obviously, as you work on it and there's a finalized version, this is going to be an important public document because housing is, and I think Chairman Seed will back me up here. I think housing is the single most important cost generally in people's lives. And it is the single biggest driver of whether people are actually going to be able to afford to live here. So it's important for us and communities like ours to make sure that we are all working together to make housing as affordable and safe and accessible as possible to everyone. The stony silence means I'm not sure there are any additional comments. Councilmember Dunn.
I do. I have a question. Just because I don't know, like Nicole alluded to becoming over income. And one of the things that I've seen is there's several people I know that are in housing, like the housing authority. Two of them have gotten married, but they're not adding the person on their lease because it's an extra income, but they don't want to move because there's not a lot of place to move. I have another friend who, the child is now working and having a salary too. But all this leaves them kind of like on the down low, which is not really great. Is there any way to include if you have a life change that you can be, open and honest about it without having to uproot your life, as you alluded to? You can't even get a raise at your job without having to fear moving, which is very difficult to find alternate housing.
Just it's important to kind of, if we didn't talk about this, we probably should have. The specific to the workforce housing program that was set up really to deal with Connecticut statute 8-30G, which mandates that you have 10% of your housing population or number of housing units deemed affordable. And they define that based off the 80% state median income. That's kind of where that all generated. Norwalk is at a little over 13% of its housing stock that meets that requirement. The concern, and so we're in a very pretty comfortable position in terms of dealing with that statute, but the concern is if you fall below that 10% threshold, then a developer can come in and pretty much ignore all your zoning rules, and that's a big concern in a lot of the surrounding towns. So it's kind of like, well, you get what you deserve, in some sense, for not addressing the problem sooner. But it's not a good option for communities either, because it kind of just ignores the way you decided you wanted to set things up. So that's why that program was set up. So I don't think we can say we would be running afoul of the rules related to that statute if we ignored the income limits. But I think there are things we could do to address that concern while still maintaining compliance with that statute.
Yeah, and I just wanted to quickly add for that, I know in the old zoning regs, I think it was like one district had this funny reg within the workforce housing that allowed like a certain small percent increase when you were within the program for your income, but it didn't work like elsewhere. So I don't know, within our recommendations or something we can play around with when you enter the program at a certain price and then you're allowed a certain amount of wiggle room if your income changes and you don't get kicked out the next year because you get a promotion, something to that effect we can potentially play around with, perhaps.
I think that would be helpful for a lot of the people that are on that cusp,
And I have to say that's key, because Miss Edie has alluded to it. Ms. Dunn has heard stories, and there are stories of people just getting $100 over their income, or working overtime so you can buy toys for Christmas or whatever, and they're actually losing their apartment because of that. It's not based on the income. It's based on just how much money you've actually made over that. And I think that is a tragedy that is happening. And also, I've heard of folks who've moved into these units where, once they're in, then they've got to pay for trash. And now they've got other expenses, there's services that have been tacked on. And so that just becomes a real concern. So people are being pushed out of those workforce apartment dwellings just based on a very simple increase. And I don't know if that's something we can regulate at our level, or if that's something the state has to really look at. But it is a concern, and it's happening.
There's definitely a lot of, I think that's such a profound point. And I think that there's a lot of great academic work. I think about Matthew Desmond and his book Evicted, and he has a newer book called Poverty in America, which is the sociological sort of explanation of people who live sort of on that bubble where the slightest increase, if they are doing well, if they get promoted, can actually end up punishing them, because then they get kicked out of the housing and now they're in a whole new bucket and they don't really have the support system to be able to afford and authoritatively live that lifestyle. That's such a crucial point. And there are a lot of people, and this report really spells it out, how many thousands of cost burdened people and families who live here in Norwalk. And so I do think it's something that we have to work with primarily, I would imagine, at the state level. But this is this is affecting how we operate, obviously, in the local level. It's why we're having this discussion. I do think, one of the things that, as Ashley, as you and your team work on sort of updating the draft, I do think specific action items that are within our legal ability to do, very sort of specific recommendations that we could do, I think would be enormously beneficial. I think right now the recommendations are, generalized. Obviously they're, and I think that the more specific, I think frankly, the better for us to sort of take the baton and run with it in the future.
And Chair, if I can say just one more thing, because this is my experience. And so I saw where they said deed restrictions in perpetuity, particularly, I guess, in home ownership. That has to really be looked at closely, because really it doesn't provide the equity for homeowners that others would get. Although we know you're getting something that you can afford, and I understand that. I will just tell you, quite frankly, where I live, these units were built with the deed restriction in perpetuity for 99 years. And so we are severely restricted on what we can sell our units for. And so if I sold my place, I couldn't be able to put any money down on anything else. I would have to move to another state. And so the equity in that is kind of skewed, because you're thinking home ownership is supposed to be the next thing that moves you forward and builds generational wealth. But when you put deed restrictions on that are so severe that people would rather just stay because they know that selling, you wouldn't be able to move up or move on. And I think I think that's a disservice through the CAFA and wherever that exists. So I think when you're talking about deed restrictions in perpetuity, you have to look at that.
It also probably is
Closer.
to act on upgrading or investing money in
Right.
this too.
Councilmember Najelski-Eichner, and then I know for ECD, I know we have a second meeting where we have a couple items. So I just want to be mindful of everyone's time, even though frankly, I could do this discussion like all night. I think this is wonderful. But Councilmember Najelski-Eichner.
I'll be very quick. In that request for specificity, and I apologize if this was requested, I had to be offline for just a minute, and so I missed. But if it would be possible to get a list, I saw the recommendation for considering to build on, options for building on city property. Could we get a list of city property, and particularly city property that is not restricted in such a way that building would not be possible on it? So obviously, for instance, some of our parkland has restrictions, but it would be, I think that recommendation, your request for specificity, Chair, that would be a kind of specificity that would turn this from a generalized recommendation into something we could actually discuss and consider.
Yes, so we are doing a GIS analysis looking at underutilized land within the city, including city-owned properties. So there will be a list and a map in the final report. And the action items that I went through in the slide deck today are very high level. We already have some more specific action items in the matrix that we went over with the committee earlier this week. And we are furthering the development of that as we move through the process. So there definitely are more specific recommendations.
Thank you so much. And will that map include things like deed restrictions so that we can see whether the land is truly available or not?
If the deed restrictions are publicly available, we wouldn't identify things like parkland because there's other restrictions in place for the development of parkland. You need a disposition of that land that could make it complicated. So we would be screening out parcels that either, maybe they were too much in a floodway or too many wetlands. We'd be screening out things like that.
I
Perfect.
think
Thank
what
you
we
so
could
much.
do- I'm sorry, Nora. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying thank you. That's helpful.
I was going to say what we could do is if after that list is compiled, if there whoever's going to take the next step on that particular aspect of the city-owned properties or the other properties, if there was properties that were positive in terms of the other criteria to make it buildable, that's when we could take a look and see if there were other restrictions, maybe deed restrictions or something else. That would probably be more of a city staff task at that stage.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I'm on mute. Thank you, Ashley, Steve, Michelle, and the Economic Community Development for your really incredible work here. And we're so excited to see what comes of this. But as what we've heard, as we've heard before, we've talked a lot about this, but it is about moving this to the next step to action. So I'm glad that as we continue to work on this and as we continue to work and try and be a resource with you, that we help move the ball and, hopefully be able to work with our state and federal delegations and really making a dent in what is a crucial problem. So thank you all. I know for the ECD.
Just 1 second, Josh.
Oh, sorry.
No
Chairman
problem.
Seed.
I just want to thank you all too, and also thank you, Josh, for really doing this joint meeting with the housing ad hoc committee, because it's really something that it's a complex issue, and we mentioned that a lot tonight. It's not something that's going to be solved by one solution or just one committee, and even not just here in Norwalk, but it's something that really is going to require like all hands on deck. And I'm excited to see all of the council members here. We have 10 council members on this call, and it's exciting to have this conversation because it's something that's so urgently needed. And even though affordable housing, it is a national crisis and regional, but it is a Norwalk issue. Like we heard from Miss Edie, and we heard stories from Chairman Young, and President Young, of all of the issues right here in Norwalk. And I think that that's important for us to remember, that this is still a Norwalk issue. Even though it's happening all over the country, it's something that is happening to our residents here in Norwalk. And it's something that touches all committees. It's a sustainability issue. It's a economic and community development issue. It's an issue that just everybody kind of should be focusing on, because it's one of the pillars of just quality of life. And it's really exciting to have this conversation. So again, thank you all for being here at this conversation, and we got to continue to work because our people urgently need it.
Thank you, Chairman Seed. So here's what's going to happen now. I think we're transitioning here so we're going to end the joint meeting of the Economic and Community Development Committee and the Ad Hoc Affordable Housing Committee. And we're now going to move on to the second phase, which is just the August meeting of the Economic and Community Development Committee meeting. So I want to, again, thank our panelists and guests for the joint meeting. But I just want to note for the record and for the minutes that we're going to be closing the first meeting and starting the second meeting. As I understand it, for ECD, just stay on this link. There's not going to be a second link.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do we have to take a motion to adjourn?
I guess we do. Motion to adjourn.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
He took Lisa's bullet.
I'm not 100% tonight, you guys. Oh, very sick.
Oh.
Feel better.
Thanks. Stupid COVID. Oh, it's the worst.
Too much tennis.
I probably did get it there. I don't know.
You probably got it at pickleball. That's what happened.
Did
So
he say pickleball?
I said it.
Oh
I
my
didn't like
God.
it.
Yeah. She got COVID in the kitchen.
playing pickleball.
So
I
record,
just put it everywhere.
That's a
It
pickleball
was just
reference. That's a real
all
thing.
everywhere. You're probably playing pickleball right on your desk. You probably got a mini pickleball back and forth, don't you? Well, yeah, that's what he's doing.
so we're still recording or we're stopping? and
Yeah, so we're still recording. I think I'm going to start the second meeting now. So as it is 8:23 p.m. This is the Economic Community Development meeting of August 1st, 2024. With us at meeting number 2 is council members Heather Dunn, Jim Frayer, Barbara Smith, Lisa Shanahan, Dalen Seed, and Council President Darlene Young. So we've done roll call. Is there any public participation for this second meeting?
Yes, Diane, we will allow you to talk. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Sorry, just a refresher, since I know we just moved from another meeting, public participation has to be on items on the agenda for the second meeting. So not on the housing discussion we just had.
Am I on?
Yes.
Okay, good evening, and thank you. That was an interesting discussion. For the record, I'm Diane Lauricella, 40 years here in Norwalk. I wasn't going to speak tonight, but then I read the agenda, and I'm speaking tonight about the items related to the mural on West Avenue connecting South Norwalk with our old Norwalk Center. I, as a former chairman of one of the committees on Sono Art Celebration, very much appreciate the power of art for economic development, for sense of place, and the like. I'm asking tonight that this particular item goes back to the drawing board. I ask that you do not approve it because of the following reasons. I read the email or the memo that Sabrina and others sent to you. I first of all wanted to speak up for the regional and local artists. I'm quite disappointed, and I think you, the council people, need to tell the business division that they need to go back to the drawing board, because I read how much money it would cost us to have someone from Florida, I think it's Ernesto, and Sunny from LA, not only to be paid an exorbitant amount of money to travel here, but their assistance as well. $7,000 for a month's worth of work each for the assistants, and there is a tiny local component of $4,000 for 2 weeks of work. Now, the thing is, I am not familiar, and I didn't have time to check and see what typical murals of this size go for in Fairfield County. But I do think $180,000 plus, there's some contingency, and the fact that it is not a local or regional artist. I read the backstory about how they had a rigorous discussion and a vetting process with the Arts Commission, and I will be speaking with that chairman, because I'm really disappointed that we are repeating the same problem we had with the yellow ribbon issue, which cost, I think, in grand total, $250,000, and that was about, 8 years ago? I also would like to know how much it will cost to deconstruct or take down the yellow ribbon, how much in real cost for the pressure washing and weed whacking that we will do as city. I mean, it's still going to cost us money to have a sense of the entire cost of this. And again, we need local or regional artists to be used on this project. And also by asking Sabrina and her people to go back to the drawing board and find a less expensive project, which they could do, but they have shown us before that when given a lot of money, that they sometimes go a little out of bounds, if not a lot. And I'm talking about the Christmas stuff and the Halloween stuff. Some of them all good. I know we want to have events, but this is exorbitant. I really don't have time before Tuesday to make a big deal about this, but based upon the discussion I hear tonight, I guess I'm going to have to make that decision. I do think you all on this call have a duty to, even if it's IRA money, you have a duty to ask for reasonable budgets on these things. And when on page 48, when I read that some of the details on what the money was for, I say this doesn't meet the smell test as far as reasonableness and helping our local and regional artists. I don't care that there will be 3 local artists working for 2 weeks. I'm talking about the main costs. And with this, I'll stop. I will listen to what you all have to say. I ask again, do not approve. This is not time sensitive in the way that many of your colleagues, sometimes you have grants and things. I ask that you press the pause button, go back to the drawing board, literally, pun intended, and ask that this be rethought out and we don't make the same mistake we did with the yellow ribbon situation. Thank you.
Other members of the public who would like to speak?
The only remaining people are individuals who be helping me present tonight. So
Close public participation. Just quickly, approval of the minutes of the June 6th regular meeting. Do I have a motion? Councilmember Shanahan. Any amendments, changes to the minutes? The only one, a few quick changes on under new business. The third paragraph, it said, Ms. O'Leary said that DRS requires a public hearing. Mr. Goldstein, to clarify, said instead of they, it should really just be the council. And then I noted on page 2, says Mr. Goldstein then brought up federal funding secured by Congressman. It says Heim, H-E-I-M. That should be Himes, H-I-M-E-S. And bottom of that page, it says Mr. Goldstein pointed out that the funding was split between. It says AARP. That's meant should be ARPA, A-R-P-A. That was all I had. Does anyone else have any other changes to the minutes? Seeing none, then I'll call for a vote for the meeting, for the minutes from June 6th, 2024 as amended. Okay, that passes. New business. This is all business development and tourism tonight. We'll start with item 1, and I'll read it into the record. Authorize the Mayor, Harry W. Rilling, to execute all documents to renew the contract for marketing services between the City of Norwalk and Dornberg Callenbach Advertising, LLC, for $150,000 for 1 year. Sabrina Gadetsky and I think Todd Callenbach is here with us tonight. And Sabrina, floor is yours. Oh, I'm sorry. I need someone to move it. Councilmember Smith, who usually always reminds me when I forget to do it. So she gets the motion.
Yeah, I know she does.
thank you all for staying on for these items tonight. So the first item is, as Josh mentioned, the contract that we have in place with DKA. This is an operating budget expense. It's their last year of the contract extension. We went out to bid 4 years ago now. So once this final extension is complete, we would rebid the work that they've been doing. The first years that they were with us in 2019, they were specifically tasked with drawing up new websites for us, new branding, all of that fun jazz. We have the Visit Norwalk website, which they oversee and administer changes to and updates. Same thing with the Norwalk for Business site. They also manage all of the social media for both of those, as well as all ad placements that we do. So there's kind of a combo deal of marketing services that they provide for the city. He provided a PowerPoint presentation for you all tonight, but considering everyone's time, if you would like him to go over it, he's happy to do it. But the highlights of that are really that the work has been growing. Our impressions are always growing, which is great to see. Our click rates for our emails are really high, which is again great to see, normally not the case. So we're happy that our emails that are going out to the public and to our business owners are actually being used and being productive for us. We not only use the tourism website and the Norwalk for Business website as tools for promotion and marketing for ourselves, we use it for other businesses and other organizations as well at no cost to them, which is a unique thing that many cities don't offer. So we're excited that we're able to provide that in lieu of kind of any other financial incentive that other municipalities may be using. And we are always inclusive. So it doesn't matter where your business is, what your business is. If it's tourism related, it'll go on the tourism site. If it's not and more service related, we'll do highlights on the Norwalk for Business side. So no matter what business is in Norwalk, we usually have a place for them to not only advertise, but promote themselves and tell their stories. So we're excited to have those assets, but without Todd, they would not exist. So we're grateful that we have him on staff with us, and he's been really great and responsive to us with everything that we could ever ask of him. So we're really grateful for that. In the past, he's actually helped other organizations through us as well, like the Earth Day event. He created the branding for that under our contract. So it's been great to kind of work with him on all these different facets of marketing for the city. So as I said, this is the last contract extension that we have. We'll go out to bid next year. Well, technically this year, going into next year. So that's it. And if you have any questions specifically about what's included in the PowerPoint, what's included in the memo, Todd is here to answer any questions that you might have.
Does anyone have any questions? Todd, just personally wanted to thank you. I know we started a little late because of the preceding meeting. Does anyone have any questions for Todd Kelleback or Sabrina?
It was a good job.
Yeah. Councilmember Dunn.
Where's the company based out of?
We're in Bloomfield, Heather.
Bloomfield, Connecticut?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're responsible for the I Love Norwalk?
All of that fun stuff, everything that we've done up to this point, marketing wise and branding.
Okay. Seeing as there aren't any questions, I just wanted to thank Todd for and Sabrina for all the work you do to help, brand the city. It's really important, and it's important to get out there. So I really appreciate your work, and I will call for a vote. All in favor? Opposed?
I'm gonna abstain.
Okay. I'm sorry, Councilmember Young, is that in favor or opposed?
In favor, I'm sorry.
Okay.
In favor.
All right. So then that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry, I'm doing math. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in favor. 7. Oh, sorry. Yeah, 1 abstention. 6 in favor, 1 abstention. This is why I went to law school. Okay. In the interest, since they're connected, I think I'm going to read items 2 and 3 in together because they're a connected item. So item 2, authorize the mayor, Harry W. Rilling, to execute a contract with Sunny Behan to install the West Avenue underpass mural in an amount not to exceed $91,750. Item 3, authorize the mayor, Harry W. Rilling, to execute a contract with Orange LLC to install the West Avenue underpass mural in an amount not to exceed $91,750. Account numbers noted. Sabrina? And I see that Brian Casper is here, and
I'll
anyone
move
would
those items
anyone
for you.
like to move the item? I was going to give it to Jim. I thought Jim was going to raise his hand, but he didn't. So it goes to Barbara again.
Awesome. I'm staff. The Office of Business Development and Tourism is staff to the Arts and Cultural Commission of the city. So this is technically an Arts and Cultural Commission item specifically, which goes through our committee to then go to council. Brian Casper is on. He's the chair of the committee. I'm gonna take the reins on the item, but if you have questions and want to specifically address the selection process and how we've gotten to this point, Brian is kind of your guy, but I'll give a high level overview. And if you want to get in the weeds of how they selected, what their decision makers were, he can opine on that because he was the leader on that portion of the project. So essentially, almost 2 years ago now, we had an RFP put in place, well, a request for art, not really an RFP, but a call for artists to come up with a mural for where the vines currently are on the West Avenue wall. Our intention originally was to secure grant funds through Bloomberg Philanthropies. We were denied that grant. They don't give any rhyme or reason why we were denied that grant, but we were. But the council was gracious enough last year to fund the full amount of the project. So if we did not get the grant, that we were able to still execute on that project. So we got hundreds of responses, and from that, the commission reviewed them all for artistic quality, for meaningfulness to the city, all these other different factors with a subcommittee of the commission. And then once that subcommittee had a selection that they were comfortable with and that they thought were the best representation of the proposals that we received, those were presented at the Arts and Cultural Commission meeting, where they were discussed extensively. The artists were there to speak on the items. And from that, they selected the chosen piece of art, which is the one that everyone has seen at this point. From that, we wanted to get the public more involved with the process to tweak what we had already kind of come to terms with as a good kind of template for what we were looking for. So we wanted the public to opine on the verbiage that would be on the mural, the animals that would be on the mural, and the colorways of the mural. So we put out a survey. We got 451 responses. All of them were very clear. Color option A was the favorite, which was the brighter option. There were actually animals that we didn't even include on the list that were very high items that people wanted to see in the mural, like the harbor seal. We got over 50 people who physically typed that in as an other answer, which was really great, and that'll be included in the mural. We have some other animals in there. The large notable one is the humpback whale. There's also some birds in there. The idea behind the mural is really to enhance what our natural habitat is in the state of Connecticut, but also specifically in Norwalk. So they're doing hyperlocal flora and fauna as well as kind of earth, land, and sea, which is the floral part, and then the animals that are birds, and then also rabbits, things like that. So it kind of encompasses all of those three elements. So the final design is what is in the packet. You also should see the survey results. The budget for this is in and around, I believe it's $183,000. That's included in there as well. We're currently working with local paint vendors to actually bring this price down even. We've been speaking with Ring Zen that is actually looking to donate the paint to us, which is going to be really great and amazing to not only work with a local business and support a local business, but also to keep our costs down on this. A lot of members of the commission, including Brian himself, are actually going to be doing the priming of the wall and things like that, which you'll see that the prep and the priming of the wall has kind of been taken out of that budget because we took it on a volunteer basis to be able to do that. That's basically it for me. We're excited to have them here. Brian, you can speak more to the selection process and kind of the impetus behind all of that. I wasn't heavily involved in that piece of the process. So if you have questions specifically on that, Brian's here to answer them. And Brian, if you just want to give a high level overview of that process in more detail than kind of I did, that would be great.
Sure. Happy to. Thank you everyone for letting me chat here and present this project to you. I'm a little under the weather, so apologies if I'm a little hoarse. You know, Sabrina touched on really the basic overview, and there's not a lot to elaborate on there. We put out an open call. We received, if I remember right, it was somewhere around 100 applicants with proposals for this, of which we narrowed down, a subcommittee narrowed down to 2 years ago. I'm trying to remember. I think it was 5, which we then narrowed down to 3, and of those 3, this one was chosen. That, you know, it was pretty straightforward. I normally don't like to put out calls that ask for specifically for proposals. I, you know, personally as a muralist, don't apply to things that ask me to work for free, but this was one due to the parameters of the Bloomberg grant. We had to actually ask for physical artwork for this. So, you know, we did see what artwork was being proposed for this location specifically. The ask was specific yet vague. We had asked artists to create something, or propose something, I should say, that related specifically to our place in their preferred style, medium, what have you. So we had a pretty wide variety. I would say the most common one was basically what we're looking at here, which is local flora, fauna. Yeah, that's kind of the nuts and bolts of the process.
And I will chime in here from a timeline perspective. So pending approval, the vines are actually going to be coming down next week. The redevelopment agency is taking those down. To answer Diane's question, I believe it's going to take about $14,000 to remove the vines and put them in storage. The intention is not for them to go away completely. They're in storage for a reason. We've looked at multiple alternatives to put them up in different locations, but because of the size of the bolts and the heaviness of the metal, there's only specific kind of places we can put them. So we're currently looking at other options for that. And following an approval, we would then have the artists start here Labor Day weekend. They would be flying in. They would be here for a month. We'd have a public community event where folks would be able to meet the artists, see the artwork in the process, so not completely finished, and kind of learn about who the artists are, what they do, how they make their living as artists and only artists, which not a lot of folks are really privy to, which is exciting. And then following that, we'll have a launch event essentially when the mural is complete. There's been jokes about me putting up a bunch of sheets and ripping it down, but to unveil the mural, but it would be a very long sheet.
Yeah, 20,000 square foot mural. I don't know if we have enough sheets for that.
So we're going to have a full press event around the showing of the completed mural, but also the official designation that we received for the Arts and Cultural District of Norwalk, which this is the central, literally in the middle of the 2 kind of subsets of the district. So it'll be kind of a one large event centered around arts and culture, which we're really excited about and think would be really great. And to the pricing portion, Brian, if you want to, as a muralist yourself, kind of speak to the pricing of this for the sheer size of the mural. We did have that in mind when we were looking at the proposals and the budget items that they were suggesting. If you want to touch on the pricing, Brian, I have no experience in the pricing.
Sure. Well, first, Sabrina mentioned that we've managed to trim this budget down. The original ask from these artists and many of the ones who applied, I don't think there was one that was under 150,000. The original ask was 210. Sabrina and I personally have worked to trim this down, which include, as she mentioned, working with Rings End, as well as Jerry's Artorama to get wholesale paint. I personally will power wash and prime this wall because I believe in it that much that I was willing to see $25,000 trimmed off of this to do the work myself. So that's the first thing. In terms of where this lands in the scope of murals, this is a steal. Think about the scale of this wall. This wall is nearly somewhere around 20,000 square feet. It's massive. It's a huge wall. It's got rectangles set into into this material. It is not an easy one. I would say normal, in sort of air quotes, normal mural pricing is anywhere between $20 to $75 a square foot. So if you do that math, we're basically getting this mural for half price of what sort of a going rate is for something like this. Clocks in around $9 a square foot. Of course, it's bulk, it's big. So, some of those costs are to get trimmed. Travel gets sort of dissipated over, large areas and things like that. But yeah, that's the overview.
Ask a couple questions.
Of course.
First question, Sabrina, was the total, I don't remember the exact amount though that we approved last year for this project in the capital budget, but it's fully incorporated in what the council has already approved. So this has already 100% been budgeted for.
Exactly. So almost to last budget cycle, it was approved for $210,000, which was the original price, but we've been able to cut it down to the 183, and then we're still looking to even cut it down a little bit more if we get the materials and paint donated to us. So 183 is in there in case that doesn't pan out. It doesn't seem like it won't pan out, but we want to kind of cover ourselves in case it doesn't. But yes, $210,000 was approved in the capital budget, but this is only going to take the 183 of it, but it's in the arts and public places budget line item. So it's not specifically designated to this project alone. So we're hoping with the remainder of the funds, we'll be able to install some other type of artwork somewhere else in the city.
Okay. And then my other question is for Brian, which is, did you, this is clearly a very specialized type of mural. We're not talking about just, a mural on, a wall or, this is very specialized and it's going to require that expertise so that it lasts, right? We need for it to last. So did we have local artists apply? And, were they considered? Because I think, the cost of the, transportation and housing for artists who are coming for this mural is, something that is, a question.
Sure. I think of the nearly 100 applicants, I think we had maybe 2 local artists out of all of them. So I hear everybody's point. I've certainly seen it on Facebook and things like that about hiring local artists. And of course, we hope that our local community steps up. When you have only 2, it's pretty hard to give them priority. When this was presented to both this, when I presented initial sort of selects to the subcommittee and then ultimately to the Arts Commission, there were no names on anything. It was purely art and past work. So this decision was really made based on merit and ability to execute, as you mentioned, a wall of this scale and of one that is, talk about the visibility of it. We want something that's going to be impactful and that we're proud of. So yeah, that just I hope that answers your question. So not many local artists, which is frustrating to see. I know there's a lot of us out there, and to see only 2 step up is that's what we had to work with.
It's a very specialized type of art, so I kind of get. But yeah, I know we always want to give priority to someone local if we can.
Yeah, as just sort of a side note, I want to see opportunities created for artists in our community who maybe don't have that experience. I remember being a young artist trying to find those walls, trying to find those spaces to paint. I would love to put out something that maybe we find artists who have basically zero mural experience to help facilitate that with someone like myself or Lauren Clayton, who's painted murals for us, or Jermaine, who's local, to help teach and get someone to get that first one under their belt. But unfortunately for something like this, I don't think we have the opportunity here, something as visible as this, to really take that risk.
Okay, understood. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Also, I'll add to Brian's, we do have a project coming up that is with a local artist of a large scale as well. So it's not, we're using somebody who's not local specifically for this project, but we have another project in the pipeline that is someone hyper local. She lives in Norwalk, or studio's in Norwalk. We also are going to launch a larger call for artists for our traffic graphic boxes. And because the cost of those are so low, those will give opportunities to hopefully at least 10 local artists to each paint those boxes. So we're doing smaller hyper local stuff for our local artists as well, but also some larger projects.
Yeah, and refresh my memory, the steps in South Norwalk, those were local artists that did the steps, correct?
Lauren Clay, she lives in Stamford, so
Yeah.
local enough. She did that as well as that pump switch house or whatever in Wilson.
Okay.
Yeah.
She lives in Stamford now, but she was a Norwalk born and raised resident, so she was hyper local to us. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Young.
Thank you for the presentation. So I think it said, so this mural, can you just share with me your idea of how the mural connects South Norwalk to Wall Street?
Well, I mean, I think at its heart, it's it's a placemaking device. I mean, everybody's complained about the vines, which actually I don't even think is really the title. We've all just called them that. As being something that is missed. You're going by at 35 miles an hour and you don't even really realize it's there. If you do see it's there, you don't even realize it's a piece of artwork. Which, to Sabrina's point about moving it, we want to find a place for that really allows that piece to be experienced properly. And then that calls back to this is that this is a huge wall. It's potentially creating an environment in which people can linger, or at least that's our hope. And they sort of notice it. They slow down. It's not just this 40-mile-an-hour artery on its surface. I think at its base level, that's it.
So really, then it wasn't so much try to present a connection as I think we've all been trying to do within this development, making some sort of connection between South Norwalk, South Main Street through West Avenue, Wall Street. So but you answered that question.
Yeah. So Darlene, I think it's more meant to be a piece that adds to the walkability of the area. Like people will want to frequent that instead of getting in a car and driving, which again is something Jim's team is also working on in that corridor, and with the new development, we're working on that. So it's not the piece is supposed to be like, welcome to Norwalk. This is a big, beautiful thing. You're coming off the highway or you're walking by. This is what you're going to see. It's supposed to be like an attractor, but in reality, the brightness of it, the cleanliness of it compared to what's kind of there now, and the maintenance of this piece going forward, I think is going to be able to make that connection where it's not very pedestrian friendly at all.
No, I clearly understand that. I mean, the yellow spaghetti should have been gone decades ago, so I get it. I'm talking about were there any other types of murals presented that had something different, or was this requested? Was this something that was thought about by the committee and said, this is what we're looking for?
I mean, we certainly considered its place and how you're viewing it, its scale. There are many angles in which you're viewing this, running north, running south, coming off the 95.
No, I get, no, I'm not talking about the picture. I'm saying, so you said there were how many other RF responses?
Around 100.
So out of the 100, so you picked these folks, and so what was their charge? Like, so how did they come up with this piece? That's all. The idea, was it something, or was it something that the committee chose? So you had pieces submitted, 100 pieces, and out of those 100 pieces, you picked 10, and then you whittled it down to whatever you did to end up with this mural. That's all.
The first ask was simply for artists to propose something that related specifically to this place, whether it be its history, its its communities, its citizens, its, in this case, local wildlife. And some didn't communicate that, so those were easy outs. But that was basically that was the charge, and asking people to just create something within their style, within their body of work that reflect that.
So to answer answer your question more directly, Darlene, there was a little bit of direction in the actual posted request for proposals. So we could say we wanted a welcoming piece. It had to be in Norwalk. That was created by the commission and the committee. And then from that, that's when they got the 100 designs, whittled them down, and then selected the final.
So it was the commission that selected the final piece.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And so my last comment would just be, you know, I appreciate, you know, you say there was only 2 local artists that responded to the RFP, and that there are other opportunities for local artists. But the way it was kind of just laid out, it puts those local artists in the bracket of the least lucrative parts of these art initiatives. And so while we may not have local artists to the level of the folks that you've presented tonight, I think there's still enough opportunities and enough talent in the city, and even closer, that we make sure that we are very intentional about reaching out to folks, because when this sort of stuff continues to happen, and they're not going to respond, because if I'm a local artist and I'm not getting to participate at a level that respects my art financially, right? You're not going to apply. And so I think it's just kind of be mindful of that. And I know sometimes it can get tiring, and maybe sometimes, you know, you might have to cajole a little bit, but I think we just have to be mindful of that as well.
I agree with you completely.
All right, I see Councilmember C's hand up.
Yeah, I had a question. I know with the RFP process is especially like not doing the names or anything. But I would kind of take a step back. Like, what are the steps that we're doing to kind of build these relationship with the local artists? So that they have the relationship with the city and know about these RFPs. I know there's certain artists like Five Fingers and different things that's utilized in the schools and different things. So what are we doing to kind of build those relationships so that they can put in the quality, or they can participate in something like this?
So when we
Sorry, go ahead, Sabrina.
Yeah, when we release the request for proposals, we have a list of artists that we have from the Arts Commission that we send them out to directly. We also promoted it on social media. Obviously, it was a while back now. So it goes out to the public in multiple ways, but once through our social channels and once through direct email. We also just updated that list recently. Not that there were many changes, but we added some more local artists that are newer, that might not have as much experience, because we do have those smaller opportunities to have them get that experience. But also when we have the opportunity, when an artist from out of town comes and they need to hire assistants, they have the opportunity to work with the world-renowned artists as well to get them that experience. So that's how they find out about it. But also there's kind of the smaller opportunities for those local artists that we're really plugging into now. And that list was built from a variety of things. There's like the arts festival list. There's the list that might come from local artists that know other local artists that add to that list. And there's also the tried and true kind of Google local artists in your area and then get their contact information and put them in there. But also we've met with a lot of local artists internally when we talk about this stuff. So we're able to add them to that list as well. So they'll get the social media blast if they see it, but they'll also get a direct email from us as well.
And I think looking forward to the future, we have a new, commission member who's a musician who's very hungry to do events. We want to do in-person events to get people to understand who we are, what we're trying to do. Also support musicians and theater groups and dance groups and poetry and all the things. And that's one that I want to utilize in person to start to connect with our local creative community and creative community supporters, not just artists themselves.
Smith.
Yeah, on a slightly different topic. What I'm wondering about is the safety of the artists while they're working. I imagine, they're going to be up on scaffolding and, or, I don't know how they're going to do it, so what are you doing to consider that? Because cars are zooming by, and it's not pedestrian friendly, right? So what are you looking at in terms of keeping those artists safe?
They're renting scissor lifts that will fit on that sidewalk. There's plenty of space there for that.
Mhm.
I don't see any reason why that in and of itself isn't enough. There's certainly enough leeway there.
Okay.
In another location, if the sidewalk wasn't as wide, we'd have to close a lane of traffic, but the sidewalk is thankfully wide enough to fit the scissor lift while also still maintaining ADA access if somebody needed to get by or the artist needed to get by. So we don't have to close the lane of traffic, but that would have been the solution had we needed to kind of make our own sidewalk in that case.
Okay.
I have to say, just as I can't believe I'm asking this question. My wife's gonna think this is hilarious. On the actual depiction, like the actual art, where it's at, it says "Welcome to Norwalk." Hilariously, I'm colorblind, and I find it a little hard to read it. I don't know if like those are the final colors the artists are going to choose. I just want to make sure that people can of any different persuasion can actually read the words.
That's a really great point. I mean, I know obviously digital color versus, digital color is projected and physical color is reflected. I know it will inevitably read differently, even different times of day. It's going to look differently. But damn, that's something I've never heard in 20 years of painting murals. No one has ever brought that up. I don't even know how to answer that.
We can certainly talk to them and see if there's a way to make sure the gradient or there's an outline of some sort that doesn't affect the piece in a way that makes it more readable. But they're right now picking colors. So the colors that you see digitally rendered are not going to be the exact to the T paint color that they're going to be able to mix, because we have to get the bare paint that is close enough. So when we talk to them, we can definitely bring that up and say that we want to see kind of more prominent so that people that are colorblind are able to see it more drastically.
As another colorblind person, I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
But I think that it really
it's for real. Yeah.
It is. I mean, what happens is if you're colorblind, a lot of colors kind of blend together and you can't really differentiate. So I think the important thing is that the words, the letters come out. As you mentioned, maybe putting an outline or shadow around them would help as well. These don't look too bad. I can almost get by with these.
The next time we do a piece, we're going to have to show it to you guys to make sure you could see it clearly before we
Yeah, I wonder if there's some kind of online generator we can double check that. You've got my wheels turning. I am like, is there?
Yeah, Sabrina and Brian, there's the ADA committee. So if you call Bill and run that by him.
Yeah, no, it's
because
a great
lettering,
point.
yeah, that was really good point, you guys, Josh and Jim. So he could at least review it.
Yeah, we'll definitely share it with him and then have him make the suggestions and make the artist make the changes.
Yeah.
Only a thing I just think is worth mentioning. I mean, I think that Brian's, and Sabrina, but I think that the laying out that the rigors of this particular piece seem pretty exceptional, especially given the size, the location, the proximity to traffic. I really appreciate the comments about bringing in local artists. I find it actually a point of pride when I see our local artists doing art across our city, and I'm heartened to hear that there are going to be more local artist projects. Sabrina, if I remember correctly, tell me if I'm wrong, if this is the wrong project, but I remember there was also some component of this, whether it was by suggestions or something interactive with students that are going to be a part of this as well.
Yes, so that the event that we're going to have is going to involve the student portion and hopefully more members of the public, but also hyper local artists will be hired for the assistance for the project as well. So Brian has a group of them kind of already gearing up to help them out. Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, there's like 4 of them, 5 of them, something like that.
TBD, they're not entirely sure what they need, but yeah, there's an initial 4. But I think, Josh, I think you may be getting this confused with the fence project.
So the fence project for Ely Avenue is not at a point to be able to be shown yet, but it is getting there. But that's the project I was referring to. That's a large project that is a local artist. And that the student will be able to paint the components that she'll install on the mural.
And that we knew that that was not ready for tonight, but I appreciate the clarification because obviously I was a little off. Heather.
Hi. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for giving us a budget. That's really helpful. I don't know. I just came from a city where the murals were incredible, and I really want that for our city. My concern is, and I think I'm kind of echoing what Darlene was trying to get at, was if I saw this mural, if you took away the place finding, the name, because the name is not the art, nor the Norwalk. It could be a New London. You could write New London and you could have a humpback whale or even seals. Like, what makes this intrinsically Norwalk? And we do have a lot of things. I was just even thinking from South Norwalk to Wall Street is where they just found all the American Indians were original. You could do a whole timeline along a wall of what was in Norwalk, that's where the redcoats landed, in the grass right there next to the cemetery where the, Oyster Shell Park, and we have Oyster Shell Park. I just feel like somebody didn't do their due diligence as far as like, what is Norwalk? And I think that's part of why we really want somebody local, is so that they really understand what is Norwalk in a lot of ways. And it does mean different things to different people. And I think that's, when you talk about, I've worked with Jermaine on murals too. And part of it is because people know him and he knows the city and what it is. So I agree with Diane Lauricella that I think I would like to see it be more impactful. And I think it's a lot of money to spend without it really saying Norwalk or connecting with the people that live here. Sorry.
I mean, ultimately, I think that, that point could be made about nearly any design. If someone designs something about the redcoats landing there, they could basically say the same thing, that it doesn't speak to the contemporary history of Norwalk, for instance. And I'm not saying it's not valid.
A long space. I mean, we have a lot of history, and we have beautiful. Duvion made a beautiful mural that's at Norwalk High School that incorporates so much of Norwalk, and so every kid that walks up is like, oh, I recognize that piece of it, or I connect it with it that way. I think it's great art. I think the artist seems really good. I think you have a really good plan. I just don't see how it really makes Norwalkers feel proud of where they live. Oh, there's a humpback whale. I've never seen a humpback whale other than, do you know what I'm trying to say? It's like, and I understand and I love that you sent out the survey, and I think that's really great. And I think learning things like we need to include harbor seals, I think that's fabulous too. Because when you're a Norwalker and you've gone to the Maritime Aquarium, that's a big part of being Norwalk. And that's piece of that. The Lockwood Matthews Mansion, which is there.
Is that me or is that Heather?
That's Heather.
I think Heather froze.
Yeah, Heather froze on us.
Barbara has.
I mean, I think.
Yeah, if I could say, I think adding the harbor seal will be very helpful. I mean, point taken, right? The the humpback whale and everything, point taken. But, I think the harbor seal really does, to me, say South Norwalk. You know, I've been coming to Norwalk to the Maritime Aquarium, you know, since long before I lived here. So I think that'll help. You know, as I look closely at it, you know, some of the birds are, you know, native to Norwalk. So maybe there's a way to tweak a little bit. I mean, art's is subjective, right? We all, you know, and how we identify as Norwalkers, you know, is different, right? So what I see in this is it's the natural habitat of Norwalk, right? That what seems to be the focus. So, you know, adding the harbor seal, maybe there's a few other, you know, birds or animals or, you know, a particular fish that, you know, oysters, right? Are there oysters in here?
They're in there.
Yeah, I
They're in
thought,
there.
okay, yeah, I remember I saw it in the survey. Yes, lots of oysters. You know, so those are the kind of things to me that say Norwalk, and they're here. Maybe it's just you need to tweak it a little bit and add a little more.
And for some, I mean, for something that is, you know, really putting our flag in the area and in just supporting arts in our community, and something that is this size, nature is a hard thing for people to be upset about. You know, in terms of, you know, just I don't know. You know, there's lots of ways that I think you can do a big mural like this, but something like native species is a pretty safe one. Not that I think we should always play it safe, but for something like this, I think we should. Also, this sketch, I will just say, does not accurately depict the level of artistry that these artists have. If you haven't looked at their websites, I would. This is going to be stunning. Ernesto works primarily in spray paint, basically doing flowers and leaves that more or less mosaic together these animals. Sunny is a hyper realistic painter who also utilizes a lot of expressive mark making in some of the peripheral areas of you know, these animal portraits that he's known for. So, you know, in a lot of ways, this is sort of very zoomed out proposal that Sabrina just shared is like, it's like the tiniest taste of how impactful this thing is going to be.
Yeah, I have Ernesto's up really quick, but you can't see the detail in the rendering, but this is kind of what it ends up. Oh, okay. What it ends up looking like. Like it's so deep, you can't capture that digitally, but it's very detailed. It's very hyper.
And this is just a small piece. This is just a 4 foot by 5 foot piece.
Yeah, and there's some larger ones he has as well. But it's really kind of, as you can see, the animals are not just, you know, a pasted image. It's more like a flora fauna made animal. So.
Do you have any of his murals? Those are all canvas pieces? Or?
Yeah, hold on one second.
Yeah. Pull up his actual site, Sabrina. That's probably a better demonstration of that.
Seems like a very talented artist.
He is, and actually, and his story is really incredible too. He's Cuban. He was in the Cuban army, and he had PTSD, and he found art and art making as a way to cope with his PTSD, and now he is an internationally recognized artist. You know, so just as a person, he's pretty incredible too.
Yeah, so this is like a big rhino piece he did.
Yeah, so you get the idea that there's, you know, there's bits that are, you know, that are rhino, there's bits that are flowers and leaves, etc. A fun fact, both these artists applied independently of each other to our Monroe Street proposal. They both were in the final round and they came together to collaborate on this one, just kind of unencouraged by us. It just happened.
I thought it was an interesting note about the other artist, Sonny Behan, that he actually has an installation at the UN, which is a pretty sweet get. You know, I don't think most artists get that one.
And I think, you know, and to that point too, just based on, you know, their resumes and their recognition, I mean, it's it's a pretty good badge of honor to say that we have a mural by both of these artists working together.
And this is
we're added to that list with the UN. It's important.
This is
A
Sunny.
rising tide raises all ships. Yeah, this is Sunny stuff.
So it's hyper realistic. So
crazy. I don't know how he does those eyes.
What would be the dimensions of the humpback whale when it's fine
when it's all said and done? I'm not entirely sure.
Considering this is 20,000 square feet, I would say it's probably going to take up like 2,000 to 3,000 square feet.
Life size, basically.
Yeah, it's
a humpback whale.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which also, to the point of the humpback whales and not seeing humpback whales, there was in the survey, everybody requested that they change the sperm whale, which is the Connecticut state, whatever, mammal or something, to the humpback whale. So, this is some of the horseback committee that happens when when these things go out like this. It's like, okay, so the thing that is specifically related to the state, we're not going to use. Okay, got it.
So we just rewrite some history. That's all.
Yeah, yeah. Just change it.
Make it fit.
They do sperm whaling. Did they do that kind of whaling in Norwalk? Does anybody know? I don't know.
I don't either.
That a Norwalk thing? I don't know.
I don't think so.
Yes. Norwalk was originally a whaling industry, and now the Northeast, the whale is coming back, which is like a big thing
cool.
a few years ago. Fun environmental science fact.
I mean, so at the end of the day, this is a massive piece of art made by two internationally recognized artists. It's a huge point of pride for us. It's it's great for the artistic community to be able to say that we have something like this. And as I said before, rising tide raises all ships. This is only going to encourage more people to try their hand at it, to come talk to these artists, come hear their stories, how they came from, where they came from. By the way, we're trying to partner with Duvian at the Art Space to do the event, especially because I really want his younger patrons to really hear these two artists' stories. I think art is a pathway. It was for me, certainly, a pathway to a successful career, and these two artists show that with no questions. So
I'm glad that you're working to do that. I think that's fantastic. Does anyone else have any questions or comments about this?
I just want to make a comment. So I think so. I don't want you to mistake my comments as so much a questioning the artist's capabilities, because clearly they are exceptional, and it will be beautiful, as it should be. Again, we're talking about connection, and so that's it. So that's my concern. So I'm sure whatever it ends up being, it's going to be exceptional and beautiful and all of that. So and Norwalk would definitely benefit from the caliber of folks that you've been able to secure. So
thank you, President Young. Are there any additional comments? If not, I'm going to call for separate votes. I think we need to vote on these items actually one by one. Seeing none, a call for a vote. I'm going to start with item 2. Authorize the mayor, Harry W. Rilling, to execute a contract with Sunny Behan to install the West Avenue underpass mural in an amount not to exceed $91,750.
I'll move that.
Moved by Councilmember Freya. All in favor? Opposed? 1, 2, 1 abstention. 2 opposed, 1 abstention. This item passes. Item 3, authorize the mayor, Harry W. Rilling, to execute a contract with Morange LLC to install the West Avenue underpass mural in an amount not to exceed $91,750. Do I have a motion? Favor. Opposed? Abstentions? So same thing, 4 in favor, 2 opposed, 1 abstention. As well. With that, there's nothing else on the agenda. Anyone want to make a motion? Prayer. But we all know what he said. Motion to adjourn.
Yeah, good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.